There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hi True Crime Conversations fans. Over summer, we're dropping some investigations from Mamamia's Extraordinary Stories, the podcast that takes you inside the stories you thought you knew with the people who really do. If you missed Monday's drop, we shared episode 1 of a 3-part deep dive into convicted scammer Belle Gibson. You can scroll back an episode in this feed to go back and catch up on that. But this week, the team looks at how the fake terminal cancer patient's web of lies started to unravel. We'll be back in the new year with all new True Crime Conversations.
Belle Gibson was travelling to Queensland for a funeral when she was first contacted by Melbourne newspaper The Age. 2 reporters were calling the cancer sufferer seeking some clarification. They wanted to know exactly how much of the money that Belle was making was going to charity. It was 2015, and by now the Whole Pantry had become a hugely successful app, blog and book. Belle had always publicly pledged that a large chunk of the money it was making was being redistributed to charities and various worthy causes. So the call can't have been a complete surprise. The question marks around Belle Gibson's incredible story began to pop up when an email arrived in the inboxes of journalists and editors around Australia at the exact same time.
I can't remember the time frame between the awards and when the next thing happened, but maybe it was a couple of months. And the next thing, one of the girls in the office came in and said, "Oh my God, I've just received this email." Anonymous, but basically from somebody who is saying that they went to school with Belle and that everything she's saying is a lie. Her age is a lie. She doesn't have cancer. She doesn't have brain tumours. Everything is a lie. And it had been sent to Cosmo and Clio and like all the magazines. So everyone had got it, and I imagine it had also been sent to various journalists at newspapers because everyone had got the same email from this anonymous source.
It read,
"It has come to my attention that you have published a story about a girl I have known for my whole life. Her name is Belle Gibson, creator of the Whole Pantry app and book, and a so-called terminal cancer patient. Unfortunately, there are a few things you might need to know before you consider publishing more about this woman. She's a compulsive liar. In fact, she got so tangled in her own web of lies living in Brisbane, she moved to Melbourne to start a new life of lies, the cancer lie this time. For one, this girl isn't 26 years old. She was born in 1991, class of 08, Wynnum High School in Queensland. My younger brother was in her form class. Secondly, she never had, nor does she have currently, any form of cancer. Where's the proof? I've known Belle since her childhood and am close with her mother, and she has always had a problem with fabricating stories from nothing on a regular basis. It's one thing to act as if she can cure her cancer by eating organic, which simply isn't true, but to give false hope to people who are actually fighting cancer is nothing short of evil. You must be aware of this before you publish stories about this woman. She is selling her fake sob story in order to profit from her app and book sales. She's a wolf in sheep's clothing and a master manipulator. Sincerely, sick of seeing her lies published."
Of course, one anonymous email alone wasn't going to unravel Belle's carefully constructed story. It was the kind of rumour that could have come from anyone jealous of Belle's success. After all, at the level of fame she'd achieved, Belle was bound to have attracted some enemies. Maybe this was a jealous old friend, a disgruntled former colleague, someone trying to cut down a tall poppy. Determining Belle's credibility would take time, and no one wanted to go after a young cancer sufferer. As legendary TV journalist Tara Brown told us, at first, reporters were interested in clearing Belle's name, not destroying it.
because she seemed to be the pin-up girl for people who are desperately unwell and who desperately want to be well, and a very sympathetic one, somebody who'd been so terribly sick and who had garnered the support of so many people, to then have these doubts raised. I think the suspicion was probably against the allegations, or those making the allegations, more than her to begin with. People wanted to believe her.
Chasing both Belle and the foundations she was supporting began as more or less a fact-checking mission. But it would spiral into the beginning of a reckoning that would devastate Belle's devoted followers and obsess the Australian media for years to come. From Mamamia, welcome to Extraordinary Stories, the podcast that takes you inside the stories you thought you knew with the women who really do. I'm your host, Emma Gillespie. We've heard about the meteoric rise of Belle Gibson, and in this episode we'll learn about how it all came crashing down. How a woman who once provided hope for some of the nation's most vulnerable people exploited them for cash and clout.
She was appealing to a very vulnerable audience, and she was the epitome of health. She was claiming that she was going through what many of them were living with, dying from, and she seemed to be giving them a way out.
In classic medical deception, a person knows precisely what they're doing. They may not know why, but they know, and you can tell this from the considerable planning involved in their actions, that they really do intend to deceive other people.
It made me think, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I've got it wrong. You guys, the doctors are telling me that I need to do this, but really all I need to do is sip coconut water and, eat a clean diet and things will get better.
This is Extraordinary Stories, Belle Gibson. Whispers about Belle's credibility were growing louder. But there was one easy way to clear the whole mess up. Ask the charities Belle had claimed to work with if they'd received any money. And that's what Bo Donnelly and Nick Toscano, the age reporters who had called Belle that day in Queensland, decided to do. Belle Gibson had always said that the speedy success of her food as medicine platform would benefit those who needed it most. Other cancer sufferers, vulnerable young girls. She'd publicly supported charities like Melbourne-based One Girl, which runs education programs in Sierra Leone, and Southeast Asian charities that work to prevent maternal and infant deaths. And she'd always claimed that a large portion of the Whole Pantry app sales, that some, if not most, of the profits from the over 300,000 downloads of a $3.79 purchase were being distributed back into the community. When reporters tried to contact Belle in March 2015, her phone was turned off. She was on her way to Jessica Ainscoe's funeral on the Sunshine Coast.
My name is Jess Ainscoe and I'm here to talk to you about my book, Make Peace With Your Plate, which has been selling super well and I'm so grateful for that. Our bodies are designed to eat food that Mother Nature provides us, so we need to really make an effort to feed them that so that they can be nourished from a cellular level. Speak kind words to yourself and don't be so nasty. Don't beat yourself up. You need to be your own best friend and get back on your own side.
Jess had lost her battle with epithelioid sarcoma, a rare soft tissue tumour. She was 30 years old. Jess Ainscoe, the original Wellness Warrior, had used every cancer treatment, from the experimental Gerson therapy to traditional chemo, across her 7-year fight with an extremely rare and aggressive cancer. She committed everything to staying alive. Her fiancé, friends and family were devastated by the loss of this vibrant, intelligent, passionate young woman. And Belle Gibson sat at Jess Ainscoe's funeral with a missed call on her phone and cried louder than all the other mourners. Belle had always presented as Jess's contemporary, but she wasn't. By this stage, Belle's inspirational story had been making international headlines with her wellness app, the Whole Pantry, handpicked by global tech giant Apple to to come preloaded on its brand new Apple Watch.
I think we were chosen because the case study and the use around wearables for the Whole Pantry is a match made in heaven. I mean, we've had our community reaching out to us for a very long time saying we want to see a shopping list and we want to see a cook mode in the iPhone or iPad version. And we didn't really see that as a behaviour that was going to work. It wasn't seamless enough, it was too hands-on, it was too messy. And Apple have really streamlined that process with us.
Her debut cookbook, The Whole Pantry, had risen to bestseller status, and it was about to hit shelves in the US and the UK. Belle's brand had gone global and had become a money-making machine. Money that she said she was sharing with those who needed it.
I can say with confidence that we never received a donation from Belle Gibson.
Those were the damning words of a spokeswoman from the Bumi Sihat Foundation in 2015. The not-for-profit runs 3 community health, education and childbirth centres in Indonesia. And Belle Gibson had very publicly pledged that the Bumi Sihat Foundation would receive thousands of dollars in fundraising efforts that had been coordinated by the Whole Pantry. As questions began being raised to these charities around whether or not they'd ever seen any donations from the Whole Pantry, it came to light that neither Belle Gibson nor her companies were lawfully registered as fundraisers. That wasn't great news. According to Consumer Affairs Victoria in 2015, organisations found to misrepresent fundraising events could be in breach of criminal and consumer law. Belle's company, the Whole Pantry, could face penalties of up to $28,000. And as an individual, it meant Belle was at risk of 12 months jail and a $14,000 fine. But the Bumi Sihat revelations only scratched the surface.
There's an area of practice developing. 10 years ago, we used to call it internet law, which feels like a phrase that, you'd send via fax machine or something these days. But it's often referred to as sort of influencer law and social media law and internet publishing law and that sort of thing. I haven't seen a online fraud committed of this sort of scandal, and I use the word fraud loosely, I should say, just the lawyer and me talking. I haven't seen an example of online misleading and deceptive conduct of this sort of scale in this country or, frankly, anywhere.
That's James Dapucci. He's a special counsel lawyer at Sydney law firm Chamberlains. We'll hear more from him later. Tom Cowie is a court reporter with The Age. He says he remembers when he first heard about holes in Belle Gibson's story.
I do remember when I first heard about Belle Gibson. I wasn't aware of her until the media coverage started. One of my colleagues, Bo Donnelly, who used to work at The Age, was telling me about a story he was working on involving a businesswoman with an app. He thought that she was faking a cancer diagnosis and that she was making money out of that. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great story. I can't wait to see what happens. And then what unfolded from there, I didn't think I'd still be talking about it 6 years later. That was back in 2015.
But it wasn't just the money. Remember Kylie Willie, the Melbourne mum who was following Belle while dealing with her own devastating cancer diagnosis?
It made me think, I'm doing it wrong. I've got it wrong. You guys, the doctors are telling me that I need to do this, but really all I need to do is sip coconut water and, eat a clean diet and things will get better. It's hard to explain. Part of my protocol, my treatment was I had to have lumbar punctures. So I was having chemo directly to my brain. So I wasn't thinking as clearly as I would have not having that. So I was convinced that I shouldn't be having chemo, that I should try this alternative treatment first because she's thriving and I wasn't. So it was sort of obvious to me that she had the right idea and I was doing it wrong.
And Kylie wasn't alone. Belle Gibson had more than 200,000 followers. That's a lot by today's standards, but by 2015 Instagram standards, it was huge. For veteran 60 Minutes journalist Tara Brown, Belle's appeal among this vulnerable community made total sense.
She was appealing to a very vulnerable audience and she was the epitome of health. She was claiming that she was going through what many of them were living with, dying from, and she seemed to be giving them a way out. And she's very personable in her communication and somebody who's very reachable, somebody who seems that they would care about you, I think. So I think that was her appeal and her power.
It was hard to believe that anyone would do what people were beginning to suspect Belle of doing. After all, the big question, the one that the country was about to start asking itself, was if this was a scam, if Belle was a fake, well, what kind of a person does that? What kind of person would lie about a terminal illness, turn that story into a money machine, and exploit the health and hopes of people with actual problems?
Factitious disorder is a recognized mental illness in which a person either feigns, exaggerates, or actually induces illness in themselves in order to get attention, care, nurturance that they feel unable to get in any other way. And they deny any knowledge of why they are ill in the first place. So it's very baffling to doctors, and they may succeed in getting huge amounts of medical treatment, diagnostic tests, even surgery that they know they don't need.
Mark Feldman, MD, is a clinical professor of psychiatry and an adjunct professor of psychology at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He spent some 30 years studying the phenomenon of medical deception. Mark remembers when he first read about Belle Gibson.
I am such a nerd that I spend every morning checking the internet for anything new about Munchausen syndrome, malingering, factitious disorder. I use search terms like that. And I think one day I came across the Australian story of Belle Gibson, who had faked cancer, but had done it on such a massive scale that it immediately attracted my interest.
But what is malingering disorder? And how does it differ from something like Munchausen?
Malingering is not a mental illness by any means, and no one says it is. It's a behavior in which a person, again, feigns, exaggerates, or induces illness, and it can be in oneself or in another, but their goal is external and tangible. That is, it's usually money, disability payments, it can be narcotic medications, it can be evasion of criminal prosecution, evasion of military service. That is, when you look at the person's life, you can see that their medical deception is oriented towards some external goal. And in factitious disorder, a person is simply after intangibles like attention and care and concern and the love of other people who might otherwise not take notice of them. What's interesting about Belle Gibson and so many patients in my practice is that I don't think she has a single diagnosis. Sometimes medical deception in one individual can come in multiple forms. And I think that's the case here. I think she is clearly a malingerer. That is, she's been after money and other things like that. But she's also been after fame, notoriety, again, the love of people who might not otherwise notice her at all. So I think she has both factitious disorder and is a malingerer as well. But I think the malingering is prominent.
For Belle, as the attention and interest grew, so did the scale of the stories, and so her confidence. What started as support and friendship from a digital community in a chat room would open Belle's eyes to a world of possibilities, including fame and money. Lots of money. People often reflect on Belle's deception and wonder if she was so unwell mentally, if she could see what she was doing and how dangerous and hurtful her behaviour was. But Mark Feldman, who has never treated Belle Gibson, doesn't think that's the case.
In classic medical deception, a person knows precisely what they're doing. They may not know why, but they know, and you can tell this from the considerable planning involved in their actions, that they really do intend to deceive other people. And so they figure out lies that are going to be convincing that people may not check on, because the most audacious lies, like having cancer, are sometimes the ones that are automatically believed. Who would lie about cancer?
When the Fairfax journalists chipping away at this story reached out to Belle for clarification around her charity donations and received no reply, they decided to send her an email. It contained 21 questions. They gave Belle just shy of a full day to get back to them. If they heard nothing, the story outing her fundraising fraud would be published without her rebuttal. When she eventually turned her phone on after travelling to Queensland for the funeral of Jess Ainscough, this is the list of questions that awaited her.
Why have you not passed on the charitable donations you promised to the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, the Birthing Kit Foundation, One Girl, the Schwartz Family, the 2H Project and the Boomy Seaout Foundation? If you have made donations to these organisations under any other name, can you please provide evidence of this by way of tax receipts or formal acknowledgement from the organisation? If the funds were never received by these organisations, then for what purpose were they used? In your book, you say a large part of everything the company earns is donated to charities supporting health, education and the environment. Which charities have received donations from TWP? For the record, can you also please clarify the following? What is your age? You have said your age is 26, but your company records show that you have given your date of birth as the 8th of the 10th, 91. In your book, you said your cancer had been stable for 2 years, but months earlier, you had told media and posted on social media that it had spread. Can you please clarify which of these statements is false and what your current health condition is? At which facility in Perth were you diagnosed with cancer in June 2009? What was the name of the cancer you were diagnosed with? What stage was it? What was the precise prognosis? At which facility did you receive chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatment? What is the current status of your cancer? Will you provide the name of the doctors that you said in your book you see on an annual basis?
Within 10 minutes of the email being sent, Belle began to scramble. She reached out to the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre in Melbourne and spoke to their fundraising director. She apologised for their missing $20,000. Half an hour after that, a donation of $1,000 was made to One Girl. Emails were fired off to multiple other charities. Cracks in Belle's story were being exposed by the minute, and it was only the start.
And there were a lot of questions at the time when this first broke, this story first hit the media, about how she was able to dupe not just people who were donating money and the wider community, but also, yes, publishers and other groups, other companies. That then quickly became more about Belle Gibson herself, and she's been the centre of this. It's been so many questions and so much interest in her and who she is that a lot of those other questions has faded away over time.
10 hours after that first email, Belle sent a 1,500-word reply to the 21 questions from the reporters who'd threatened the entire Whole Pantry empire. Belle detailed cash flow problems and claimed the Whole Pantry was running at a loss. Belle said external accountants were being brought in to update the books. She blamed an ex-employee for being lax in their communication with Whole Pantry-affiliated charities. She even spruiked the $1,000 donation she'd made to One Girl just hours earlier. Belle said money had been given to families in need, though no evidence was provided. But Belle didn't actually answer any of the 21 questions properly in that very long-winded email. On the query of that a large part of everything earned was donated to charity, Belle said,
"It was with nothing but good intention that we publicised the fact that a percentage of profit from the app will be donated to charity. With the benefit of hindsight, we now understand that there's a large difference in the perceived financial success of the app and the actual net proceeds received. Because of the slim margins and small amounts involved in app sales, donations will be subsidised by TWP book sales, the proceeds of which are due to be paid in October as per Penguin policy."
Her app and book advance had earned Belle $500,000 by this stage. Nick and Bo's editors at The Age knew they had all they needed. The story would run. Now all eyes were on Belle. Accusations of false promises and empty bank accounts swirled. Questions now began to turn to her cancer diagnosis. Everything Belle had claimed was suddenly brought under a magnifying glass, and with every revelation came more and more questions and no answers. Belle stood firm. She was sick. She had cancer. She was a survivor. But the pressure was growing, and not only from the press. On the 8th of March 2015, Kylie Willie sat in a Melbourne hair salon. She was scrolling on her phone to pass the time, a familiar scene for anyone who's ever been in the hairdresser chair, patiently waiting to get out the door, idling away the hours on Facebook or Instagram. Kylie glanced at pictures of her friends and scrolled past Facebook status updates before she landed on a news story. Claims that Belle Gibson had failed to pass on profits from her book and app sales that had been promised to charity. Claims that her cancer diagnosis was a lie. Kylie felt the blood drain from her body.
I was gobsmacked, furious, all of these things all at once. And then I started to, comment on the Facebook post about her lying because I felt like such a dickhead, like to have been so drawn in by her, because even though I hadn't gone off my treatment, I was still, Belle said, Belle's doing this. For it all to be a lie, I don't know, I kind of took it personally, which I'm not one to normally do that or get involved in things like this, but I was so pissed off that she could lie about something that had ruined my life at that time, and she profited off it. She played on people's emotions. She took my money and everybody else's money. I sent her a message after one hospital visit, an Instagram message going, thinking of you and your little boy, hope you're going to be okay. And she replied. She was that much of a narcissist that she could reply to people and still play that part of being, somebody that's going through cancer to somebody who is going through cancer.
Kylie had adored Belle Gibson, and now she felt she'd been played for a fool. That was in March, and by late April, Claire Weaver sat at her desk at the Australian Women's Weekly. The journalist was typing up what would go on to become one of her most famous interviews. She couldn't stop shaking her head as she listened back to the quotes of Belle from her dictaphone.
I am still jumping between what I think I know and what is reality. In the last 2 years, I've worked every single day living and raising up an online community of people who supported each other. I understand the confusion and suspicion, but I also know that people need to draw a line in the sand where they still treat someone with some level of respect or humility, and I have not been receiving that.
But the most disturbing quote of all?
None of it's true.
Next time on the final chapter of Extraordinary Stories, Belle Gibson. Belle faces the music. The darling of the wellness industry is unmasked as a liar and a fraud, and once her deceptions are exposed, it becomes harder and harder to determine fact from fiction.
I think there is a bit of a pattern in people who want to lie to you, that they tell you a partial truth and then it just dovetails from there.
The nation is angry, and it's not only Belle's former fans who want answers. The courts do too.
She arrived at court all in black, dark black sunglasses, and it was a bit of a moment, I suppose, for the media because she hadn't really been seen. She'd gone into hiding, and then she turns up at court. The media is there, everyone can watch her walk in, the cameras are there, filming her, bulbs are flashing.
She went dressed like she was worth $1 million and her nose was stuck high in the air, and that was just a big F you to everybody. She's like, I'm here because you're all forcing me to be here, but I don't really care. I'm, not going to do anything that you want me to do anyway.
In our interview, she would claim that she never told anyone not to follow their conventional treatment, but it was everything. That was the whole message.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Extraordinary Stories. It was written and produced by me, Emma Gillespie, with Holly Wainwright. Audio production is by Eliza Ratliff and Madeline Joannou. The executive producers of Extraordinary Stories are Eliza Ratliff and Holly Wainwright.